So I'd like to begin today's presentation with a brief overview of the context in Kosovo. If you can move to the next slide, please. So as you mentioned, even though for example, the Kosovo War happened more than 20 years ago, it's still a period that continues to have a major impact in our society, in our political and development processes. It's a period that has been marked by a lot of suffering because it left thousands killed, many missing, and essentially the entire country destroyed. The war ended with NATO's intervention, leaving Kosovo to become a UN protectorate. And until 2008, when Kosovo declared its independence, the country's main political, economic, judiciary processes were carried out by the international community that had executive powers over the country, until the responsibility gradually shifted to the local institutions. So this, from the immediate period after the war, there was also a power vacuum that neither the local or the international community managed to fill completely. And it's a context that it has had an impact that we also witness today as we explore the issue of radicalization. So today, Kosovo is focused on internal reforms, aiming for EU and NATO integration, but the pace of these processes is visibly and painstakingly slow. Notably, Kosovo, even though we constantly hear from various EU officials that it has fulfilled all technical conditions, it remains the only country in Western Balkans without visa liberalization, which is perceived as an issue or as the way how the EU is approaching Kosovo with double standards, and is obviously having a real impact in the lives of citizens, because essentially it leaves Kosovo, or the people of Kosovo, as the most isolated ones in Europe. So against this backdrop, it's important to position the set of grievances, perceived injustices, and alienation that individuals affected by radicalization experience. So if we move to the next slide. So Jihadi extremism is one of the main agents of radicalization that has garnered a lot of attention in Kosovo and has been addressed. It has been largely manifested through the foreign fighter phenomenon that we saw from 2012, 2017. But what explains this type of radicalization in Kosovo, and how does it tie to the legacy of ethnic conflicts? So what we know so far is that in Kosovo, there has not been like an organized group or cell functioning on behalf of Al-Qaeda or the so-called Islamic State. But we did notice that the foreign fighter mobilization was not uniform across the country. And what explained this disproportionate foreign fighter presence in some municipalities when compared to others was the presence of certain individuals. So it means that specific individuals were largely responsible for the recruit of these foreign fighters. But obviously, radicalization, and tying it back to the legacy of ethnic conflict, so they were constantly bringing back themes of injustice, stigma, rape during the war, and they were constantly trying to draw parallels with what happened in 20 years ago with what was going on in Syria. So grievances of the past, characterized by interethnic strife, segregation, victimization, were quite prominent, but they were also coupled by perceptions of failed leadership efforts and unmet expectations in Kosovo's secular society. Add to that also perceived biases against Muslims living in Kosovo. So there are these trends that can be observed and that are linked with the legacy of conflict. So although jihadi extremism did not manage to polarize the society because it remained in the margin, it's still a period that caused some confusion until the government set the tone and there was a crackdown of this phenomenon. So going to the other type of radicalization that we see is ethno-national extremism. But this type of radicalization is largely unexplored in Kosovo, partly because of the donor-driven research agenda and partly because of lack of political will. But what we know from existing studies is that it's a phenomenon that is happening, is highly affected by external actors, primarily from Serbia and Russia. For instance, from Russia, they try to leverage political elites in the northern area of Kosovo with the intention of aggravating tensions between Albanian and Serbian communities while undermining prospects of EU integration. And this is also something that we see from the political elite of Serbia, so promoting this far-right rhetoric, characterized by denying Serbian war crimes, glorifying war criminals, and also complaining of Serbia's victim status at the hands of the West. So this impacts interethnic relations and political polarization, but as I mentioned, it still is not as explored as jihadi extremism, though it's viewed as a phenomenon that is reactionary to Serbia's policies. Meaning that the more radical or harsher the rhetoric of the political leadership in Serbia, the more nationalistic the response in Kosovo. So going forward, we see that there is a need to have a more balanced approach to tackling extremism and pay as much focus to ethno-national extremism, which is in line with rising threats at the regional and global level.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Yeah.